Hey, before we go any further, I want you to know something about me. I'm not the cold, calculating villain people want me to be. I'm Millie. I'm 28. And for most of my life, I have loved my family more than I have loved myself. That's not a brag. That's just the truth of how I was wired. I cooked their meals. I covered their messes. I picked up calls at 2 in the morning without rolling my eyes. I was the one who held things together when everyone else was busy falling apart. Then came March 14th. We had gathered at the Arcadia Club for a big celebration. 73 people in the room. I had helped pay for half the food on those tables. And my father, in front of every single one of them, put his hand in my hair and dragged me across the marble floor like I was trash that needed removing. I made one phone call that night. By the time the sun came up, the entire empire my family had spent 30 years building was on fire. So let me back up. Let me take you to the beginning, because nothing about that night happened on accident. It was a long time coming. Before I do that though, if you're new here, hit subscribe. We're going all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Okay, let's go. My father, Gerald Holloway, was the kind of man people praised in public and cursed in private. He founded Holloway Construction back in the early 90s, starting with almost nothing. 2 calloused hands, a borrowed pickup truck, and the kind of drive that runs over anything in its path. By the time I was old enough to understand what money bought, we were comfortable. By high school, we were rich. By the time I graduated with a finance degree and a brain full of plans, my father had become a man who treated every human around him like a piece of equipment that existed to serve his wants. My mother died when I was 11, and something in Gerald switched off permanently after the funeral. Whatever softness my mother had been pulling out of him every day for 20 years, it went into the ground with her. He didn't even pretend anymore. Caleb, my older brother, moved into his spot as heir apparent almost the same week we buried her. Suddenly, Caleb was getting the private meetings, the client dinners, the Sunday morning golf outings, where men teach their sons how to sit across a table from someone and take everything they have. Caleb was 5 years older than me. He had never once been told no. What about me? I got a list of college tours and a half-serious reminder that girls don't run construction companies. Yeah, he actually said that to my face. I was 14. I remember because I remember being furious that nobody at the table laughed or even blinked when he said it. For years, I made excuses for him. That's just how Gerald is. Old school. Hard around the edges. You know the kind of thing people say to excuse the worst behavior of men like him? Like the fact that he's hard. Somehow makes everything he does understandable. I built my own thing. While Gerald was busy polishing Caleb for the throne, I was building a consulting practice from scratch. Real clients. Real numbers, real reputation. I even started quietly correcting errors in Holloway Construction's books on the side, because their accountant was sloppy and I could spot the mistakes faster than anyone in their office. Did my father thank me for saving him 6 figures in bad audits? He didn't. Instead, he told Caleb in front of me that the books looked better. Caleb just smirked. That smirk was his whole personality for most of his life. Now here's where the story gets interesting. Because before we get to the party, you need to understand what was happening in the shadows. About 8 months before March 14th, I was working through some routine questions on Holloway's books when a number caught my eye that didn't sit right. The company had landed 3 major city contracts over 2 years. Government work. The kind of money that comes with very specific rules about how it can move. And the math wasn't matching up. There were payments being routed to a company called Ridgeline Development LLC. Big ones. Suspicious ones. I had never heard of the company, and I have made a career out of knowing who is on every contract my family touches. So, I dug. What I found made me put my coffee down and sit very still for a long time. Ridgeline Development was a ghost. Registered in Delaware, no physical office, no staff, no projects. Just paperwork. A shell built to receive money and hand it off to someone else. The registered agent for the shell was a woman named Sandra Feltz, who happened to be Gerald's girlfriend for the past 3 years. A woman none of us were allowed to know about individually. Because my father had kept her so far off the books, you would have needed a map and a flashlight to find her. My father was washing public money through city contracts, sending it through his secret girlfriend's empty company, and using it for whatever Gerald Holloway used money for when nobody was looking. I have a finance degree. I have 8 years of professional experience. I lose sleep over loose threads. I was not mistaken. I printed everything. I organized it. I built a binder so clean and so readable that any junior lawyer could have followed the trail with one hand in their pocket. And then, I did something I still believe was the wrong move, even though I meant well. I took it to Gerald. I sat down in his wood-paneled office, in front of his oversized leather chair, across his mahogany desk, and I laid it all out. I told him what I had found. I told him it had to stop. I told him the exposure was massive, and that one city audit would take the whole thing down fast. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to keep the family from eating itself. You know what he did? He leaned back in that big chair. He looked at me like I was a confused secretary who had wandered into the wrong board meeting. He told me I misunderstood how business worked. He told me to focus on my own clients and stop snooping through things that had nothing to do with me. And then, very calmly, like he was explaining bedtime rules to a toddler, he said that if I opened my mouth about any of this to anyone, he would make sure I never built another career in this city. His exact words were, "Don't forget who built this town, little girl." I walked out of his office, and I made it all the way to my car before my hands started shaking. Not from fear, from anger. I had just shown up for my family in the most generous way I knew how, and he handed me a threat. I drove home, poured a glass of wine I didn't even taste, sat on the kitchen floor and cried for maybe 20 minutes. Then I got up, because I don't stay down. I put that binder in a fireproof lockbox under my bed, and I waited. I am still not entirely sure what I was waiting for. Maybe a version of my father that was never going to exist. Maybe just someone to make the first move so I didn't have to. Months passed. Then came the promotion party. It was Caleb's idea. He had just been named regional VP at Holloway Construction, which was basically Gerald inventing a fancy title so he could hand his son more power and more money without having to officially call him partner yet. It was a flex, and not a subtle one. Gerald had booked out the private event space at the Arcadia Club. Marble floors, gold fixtures, a waitstaff so polished they looked like they had all gone to the same finishing school. 73 guests, catering, open bar, a live jazz ensemble playing in the corner. And of course, I helped plan it. Of course I did. That's what I do. I ordered the floral arrangements. I confirmed the catering order. I picked up the custom cake because the bakery called my number by mistake and nobody else had bothered to handle it. I was a co-producer of my own family humiliation, and I didn't even realize it yet. I showed up that night in a red dress, hair done, heels on, ready to play the role I had been playing since childhood supportive sister. Quiet helper, invisible engine. The first hour was normal. Drinks, small talk, the usual parade of business associates and family friends who acted like the Holloways were some kind of American dynasty you were blessed to be in the same room with. Caleb worked the room the way he always did, shaking hands, laughing too loud, making every man feel like his new best friend. Gerald held court near the bar, charming and polished in public, nothing like the man who threatened his own daughter in private. I was standing near the appetizer table with a cousin when I heard Gerald call my name. His voice cut through the jazz like a knife through silk. I turned around and his face had already changed. Tight. Cold. That look I had been reading since I was a kid. The one that meant the temperature in the room was about to drop, and I should brace myself. I walked over. What else was I going to do? He grabbed my arm and pulled me a step away from the crowd, smiling. For the room. But through his teeth, he said something that froze my blood. He said he knew I had been making inquiries. Apparently Sandra had flagged some activity. Someone had been sniffing around Ridgeline. Somehow, that trail had led back to me. I had been careful, but I had made one phone call to the city procurement office weeks ago just to confirm some numbers, and that thread had been pulled by someone who knew how to pull threads. I told him, quietly, that I didn't know what he was talking about. That was the wrong answer. What happened next is one of those moments your body remembers before your brain catches up. His hand came across my face so fast I didn't register the motion, just the impact. Open palm, hard enough to send me stumbling sideways in my heels. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a wave, like a stone dropped in still water. The silence spreading outward from where we were standing, table by table, conversation by conversation, until every single one of those 73 people understood exactly what they had just watched happen. My cheek was on fire. My eyes were watering, mostly from shock, not from tears. I was still trying to process when he grabbed a fistful of my hair, near the roots, and pulled. Actually dragged me. 2 steps toward the edge of the room, like he was hauling a piece of furniture that had ended up where it didn't belong. I heard glasses stop clinking. I heard the jazz quartet fumble their notes and go quiet. I heard someone at a nearby table actually gasp. And then I heard my brother, Caleb, The man whose parties I had driven him home from, whose debts I had quietly settled, whose reputation I had protected in rooms he didn't know I was in. Caleb laughed. Not nervous laughter, real laughter. The kind you laugh when you've just seen something that confirms everything you already believed about yourself. And he said it loud enough that everyone around us heard it. She had it coming. I straightened up. I didn't cry. Not in that room. Not in front of those people. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't going to let that show the world. I smoothed my dress. I picked up my clutch from where it had dropped near my feet. I looked at my father. I looked at my brother, and I walked out. Every step deliberate. I was not going to run. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of watching me break in the Arcadia Club in a red dress. I pushed through those glass doors into the parking lot, and the night air hit me like cold water. I sat on the bench near the valet stand. I took 3 deep breaths. My cheek was hot, my scalp was sore, my hands were still shaking, and somewhere inside me, in that quiet place where I'd been storing 28 years of accommodation and forgiveness, and the lie that family is family and blood is blood and you don't burn the bridge you were born on, something gave way. Not slowly, not gradually, clean, like a wire pulled 1 inch too far. I pulled out my phone. There was a name in my contacts I had saved 8 months earlier and never used. A number I had collected during my Ridgeline research, the way you collect an umbrella and hope you never need it. Her name was Joelle Ashworth, federal investigator, Financial Crimes Unit. We had a mutual contact in the consulting world, a person who trusted me enough to make the introduction when I first started finding things that didn't add up. I had never called her. I had told myself I was protecting the family, protecting Gerald from himself, protecting the name. Sitting on that bench with a handprint on my face and my brother's laughter still echoing in my ears, I realized finally that the Holloway name had never once protected me. I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. Joelle, it's Milli Holloway. I'm ready to talk. And I have everything. I'll be at your place in an hour, she said. Make it 45, I said. I went home, took off the red dress, made a pot of coffee, pulled out the binder from the fireproof lockbox under my bed. Every page, every transfer record, every registration document for Ridgeline. Screenshots I had recovered through channels I will not get into. A timeline I had built with my own hands, complete with footnotes and cross-references and source notes. Joelle showed up at 11:47 that night with a colleague and a recorder, and that specific look investigators get when they can tell, before they have even sat down, that what they are about to see is going to make for a very long night in the best possible way. We talked until 4 in the morning. She asked sharp questions. I had sharper answers. At one point, she looked up from a page and said, "Milli, do you understand what this means?" I said, "Yeah, I understand exactly what this means." She nodded and kept reading. Here is something about consequences that people don't really understand until they watch one land. Consequences don't show up like a storm. They show up like a bill. Quiet. Paper. Dropped at your door at some unremarkable hour. At 6:15 inches the morning, while Gerald Holloway was probably still asleep in his house on Fairlawn Drive, congratulating himself on whatever display he thought he had put on the night before, federal agents executed a search warrant at the offices of Holloway Construction. They were also at Sandra Feltz's condo. They had subpoenas for 4 years of financial records. Caleb got a call at 6:48 a.m. from the operations manager of Holloway Construction in full panic. I know this because that same manager called me out of habit, because I was the one who always answered the phone in a crisis, and I let it go to voicemail. By 8 a.m., the local business journal had the story online. By 10 a.m., 2 of the city's biggest news outlets were running with it. Holloway Construction CEO under federal investigation for contract fraud. 3 decades of work. 1 headline. Gerald's lawyers were fast and they were expensive, but the evidence was airtight, and the cooperation I had given the investigation put them so far ahead of the curve that there was no clever legal maneuver that could close the gap. The city suspended every active contract with Holloway Construction within days, which meant their cash flow essentially stopped in its tracks. Their primary bank issued a freeze notice within 72 hours.
3 of their biggest subcontractors, not wanting to catch the shrapnel, walked off active projects. Caleb, who had no idea how deep it went, because Gerald had kept him useful and deliberately ignorant, found himself holding the title of regional VP of a company being taken apart piece by people with federal badges. Now I want to be honest about something, because when I started telling this story, I promised myself I would be honest about all of it. There was no champagne moment, I didn't sit at home watching the news tick by with a glass in my hand, feeling like I had won something. What I felt was quieter than that and stranger. I felt like I had been carrying something heavy for years and had just set it down for the first time. I felt sad in that specific way. You feel sad when you finally accept that the family you keep mourning never existed. The closeness I had been trying to manufacture with Gerald. The version of him that was going to see me clearly one day. That was never going to arrive. I had already lost them before March 14th. That night at the Arcadia Club just made it official. I signed the death certificate on a relationship that had been dead in every way that mattered for years. Gerald called me 11 days later. First time he had reached out since the party. I almost didn't answer. Something in me made me pick up anyway. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. His voice was flat, tired in a way I had never heard from him before. The sound a man makes when the thing he always assumed would protect him turns out not to exist at all. He said, "Was it worth it?" I thought about it, genuinely, for a second. Then I said, "You clapped, Caleb. You literally clapped." Silence on the other end. A long one. Then he said, "I didn't think it would go that far." I said, "Neither did I," when he raised his hand. And I hung up. We haven't spoken since. Gerald's case is still grinding its way through the federal system. Slow, inevitable. The kind of slow you can't argue with. Sandra Feltz cooperated early and took a deal. I respect that, because she read the room. Gerald hired a defense team whose hourly rate is higher than most people's monthly paycheck. And they have done what expensive lawyers do, filed motions, asked for continuances, buried the process in paperwork. They have bought him time. They have not bought him a way out. The evidence is the evidence. Numbers don't lie. Shell companies don't vanish because you stop looking at them. The truth is patient, in a way that men like Gerald never plan for, because they spend so long controlling their environment that they forget control and safety are not the same thing. I rebuilt. That is the part everyone wants to hear about. The after. The after wasn't dramatic. It was something better than dramatic. It was real. I left the city for about 6 months. Worked remotely from a rental in Asheville. Got some distance. Got some sleep. Got back to running. Found a therapist who was sharp enough to skip the small talk and go straight to the actual roots of what had been happening for years. I came back in the fall with a clearer head and a smaller client list of people I actually trust. I don't do family favors anymore. I don't do off-the-books work for anyone. I charge my rate. I send my invoices. I keep my boundaries like they are load-bearing walls, because I learned in the most expensive way possible that they actually are. I tell this story not because I want sympathy, although the support I have received from people who have heard it has meant more to me than I know how to say. I tell it because I spent almost 3 decades folding myself smaller to fit inside a family that benefited from my silence. I told myself that enduring was the same as loving. I told myself that staying was loyalty. I told myself that keeping the peace was worth whatever it cost me. I was wrong about all of those things. You cannot love someone into finally seeing you. You cannot sacrifice your way into being valued. And the moment someone puts their hands on you in front of an audience, and the people who were supposed to have your back start clapping, that is not a moment for more patience. That is a moment for one phone call. So here's what I need you to hear, and I mean every word of it. Know your worth before someone else decides to put a price on it. Know your receipts before you need them, and know that walking away is not losing. Sometimes walking away quietly, in a red dress, with a full binder in a lockbox and a federal investigator saved in your phone, is the most powerful thing you will ever do. I'm Millie Holloway. I had it coming. And so did they. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it. There is somebody out there tonight who probably needs to hear it. If you love stories like this, hit subscribe. We have a lot more coming. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this one travels.